In MMA, we're used to seeing fighters give it their all in the cage. But for every second a fighter spends in an actual fight, an hour is spent in the gym. So, what MMA gyms are out there? What do they teach their fighters? What are their histories? And what kind of style can we expect from fighters who train at a particular gym? Well, I'll be going over that and more in this video. So, without further ado, here are all MMA gyms and their styles explained. Part 3. Tristar Gym is a mixed martial arts gym located in Montreal, Quebec, Canada that was founded in 1991 by Conrad Pla, Michel Lavallee, and Ron DiCecco, with the name of the gym coming from the fact that it was founded by those three men. This also makes Tristar Gym one of the few modern MMA gyms that was founded prior to the first UFC event. The idea for the gym came from Conrad Pla's experience of practicing traditional karate, kickboxing, and weight training at 3 separate gyms, which led to him having the idea of starting up a gym where an individual could pursue all martial arts in the same place. Conrad Pla, who had graduated from McGill University with a degree in commerce, was a man of many talents, being both a TV actor and a championship-level kickboxer. Conrad Pla was the ISCA North American champion and the WKA Intercontinental champion. And fun fact, Conrad fought Javier Mendez, the founder of the American Kickboxing Academy, for the ISCA World title back in 1995. Originally, Tristar was a kickboxing, weight training, and traditional martial arts gym, and at first, Pla was worried that the instructors of the different martial arts would clash with each other. However, to surprise and delight, the members of the gym would teach each other their techniques, leading to every martial artist learning and growing together. Then, in 2000, Firas Zahabi, the son of Lebanese immigrants to Canada, first stepped through the doors of Tristar. Firas Zahabi discovered martial arts when he was 18 years old, when he watched the VHS recording of the UFC 2 tournament and saw how Royce Gracie was able to defeat larger and stronger opponents using the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This experience made Zahabi obsessed with Jiu-Jitsu, and even when there was no Jiu-Jitsu gym for him to train at, he taught himself the art as best he could through books and instructionals. Zahabi first joined Tristar because of the BJJ program that was taught there by Angelo Exarchos, a purple belt under Renzo Gracie. And yes, I know that being a purple belt doesn't sound too significant nowadays, especially for a coach, but remember that this was back in 2000 when BJJ was completely out of the public consciousness. Within 6 months of training at Tristar, Zahabi earned his blue belt and was offered a position as a part-time trainer at the gym, as Exarchos could only teach classes 3 times a week. It was also during this time that Firas and the other grapplers at the gym were invited to spar with the kickboxers and Muay Thai fighters at the gym, leading to them doing what was essentially MMA sparring, even though MMA would not be decriminalized in Canada until 2013. In the early days of Tristar and Canadian MMA, those who wanted to compete in MMA did so in unsanctioned bouts on First Peoples reserves, where they earned pennies in return for taking and receiving brutal beatings. During these early days at Tristar, Firas Zahabi was still studying at university, so he did not have enough time to train full-time. Nevertheless, he became an amateur Muay Thai champion and went on to compete in unregulated MMA bouts, including an illegal fight in Quebec City where the tournament winner received the paltry sum of 250 Canadian dollars. Not US dollars, Canadian dollars. But anyways, during this time, Firas visited the Nova União black belt Wagner Fabiano's academy as well, which he did to acquire more knowledge and refine his skills. Firas also trained in New York City at Renzo Gracie Academy under John Danaher, who would later go on to award Firas' black belt in 2011. When Angelo Exarchos became unable to teach at Tristar due to time constraints, Firas had advanced to the point where he was offered the full-time position of Jiu-Jitsu coach at the academy. But once he was in charge, Firas Zahabi made the bold decision of getting rid of the gi in his BJJ classes, making Tristar one of the first no-gi grappling gyms in the history of the world. Firas Zahabi first met his greatest student, Georges St. Pierre, when he was an amateur fighter competing in a promotion called Full Contact Jiu-Jitsu. George was also an amateur who was just beginning his MMA career, so Firas became his coach. However, Firas didn't take to coaching GSP full-time until after GSP's shocking upset loss to Matt Serra, an experience that led to George seeking a fresh start. And a year after St. Pierre's loss to Serra, Conrad Pla, who was busy running other businesses, sold Tristar Gym to Firas Zahabi, who would then go on to turn the gym into one of the top MMA facilities in the history of the sport. After Firas Zahabi became George's full-time coach, GSP would go on to have his legendary title reign, defeating top fighters like Matt Hughes, BJ Penn, Nick Diaz, and Carlos Condit to establish himself as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, mixed martial artist of all time. During George's title reign, Firas served as GSP's head coach, helping the champion refine every aspect of his game, from his boxing, to his wrestling, to his jiu-jitsu, to his conditioning. However, Firas did not do this all by himself. Instead, Firas brought in experts from every martial art to train GSP, with Firas serving the role of molding what they taught to fit GSP's style. Notably, Firas has said that GSP's second victory over BJ Penn at UFC 94 was crucial in getting access to top-level trainers and coaches, as the victory made it so that great trainers like Roger Gracie and Freddie Roach became eager to train GSP. Thanks to the legendary legacy that GSP left, Tristar Gym became the central hub for top-level MMA in Canada. As a result, many top-level fighters from not just Canada, but around the world have trained at the gym. Some notable fighters include the UFC welterweight top contender and Bellator champion, Rory McDonald, UFC featherweight Arnold Allen, UFC lightweight Nasrat Haqparast, WEC bantamweight champion and UFC fighter Miguel Torres, PFL lightweight tournament winner Olivier Aubin Mercer, and of course, we can't forget the man who fits into all of this somehow, the Motown phenom, Kevin Lee. Recently, the gym's most successful fighter has been Firas Zahabi's younger brother, Ayman Zahabi, who, at the time of me making this video, has broken into the top 10 of the UFC bantamweight rankings despite being 38 years old. Ayman's success in particular is a testament to Firas's immaculate coaching, as Ayman by all means should be past his prime in terms of age and physicality, but continued to rise up the rankings in spite of those limitations. Over the years, Firas Zahabi has gone on dozens of podcasts and done countless interviews to explain his training and fighting philosophy. Zahabi, having a degree in classical philosophy from Concordia University, is very well known for having a very analytical approach to the fight game. Importantly, Firas was one of the first MMA trainers to recognize what is obvious to us now, which is that relying on a single martial art is not enough to succeed in MMA. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, there were still purists, mostly spearheaded by the Gracies, who believed that jiu-jitsu alone was enough to win in mixed martial arts. Similar sentiments existed among kickboxers, as was admitted by Conrad Pla himself, who said that prior to seeing the success of Firas's ideas, he thought of MMA purely in terms of the stand-up game. Firas's principles of building a well-rounded MMA fighter are all best encapsulated in his greatest student, GSP, who came from a Kyokushin karate background, but developed into one of the greatest wrestlers in MMA history. And despite having that karate background, GSP didn't rely just on karate for his striking, instead training other skills like boxing to round out his skill set. Firas also has a deep and thorough understanding of fighter psychology, which I think he best demonstrates in this clip of him talking about how he helped George St. Pierre prepare for his fight against Dan Hardy.
One time he got dropped in practice, and I wanted to pull the plug. It was for a world title fight. He was fighting Dan Hardy 2 weeks before his fight. I was sure he was concussed, and I said, George, I'm pulling the round. There was one more round. He said to me, Coach, let me finish the round. I'm okay. Let me finish the next round. And I felt that if I pulled him, I would have killed his confidence.
Right.
I would have killed his confidence totally. So I said, okay, you could do the next round. And I told the other guy he was sparring with, don't land a single glove, like I whispered it to him. Not a single glove on him. Just take a mauling. And George went in the next round not knowing that the other guy's not allowed to hit him at all. And he just crushes the guy, right? He's just like mauls him and gets that. And I was really, really grateful for the other guy was a pro. And I was very, very grateful that, he took the beating that we asked him to.
Right.
And George after was like, man, I know it went bad in round 4, but round 5 was amazing. I was on fire in round 5. I said, you were. You were. He's like,
sneaky shit.
He's like, that was round 4 was not. It was just a fluke, like this is what I'm gonna look like. Round 5, I'm like, yeah. He's like, and it's a good thing it's Friday, because I have the day off tomorrow. I'm like, George, today's Saturday.
As Firas Zahabi demonstrates in this clip, he knows when to push his fighters and when to have them hold back. By sending in a pro fighter to get beaten up by a concussed GSP, he helped to reinforce George's confidence and warrior spirit while keeping him from getting hurt any further. By doing all of this, Frost balances keeping his fighters healthy with keeping their pride and confidence intact. He is also a proponent of the idea that once a fighter has mastered the basics, they should develop their own unique style, which is something that he actively helps fighters do. Interestingly, although Firas himself has stated that, at least for him, BJJ is the most important martial art and has produced countless free tutorials that are available on YouTube, many of Tristar Gym's current top fighters are volume strikers. Notably, Arnold Allen, Nasrat Haqparast, and Firas's own brother, Ayman Zahabi, all tend to be high-output strikers, with Allen and Nasrat outgunning top-level strikers like Giga Chikadze and Esteban Rivabic. However, that doesn't mean that Firas is wrong about Jiu-Jitsu being the most important art, as none of his best fighters have a noticeable weakness against grappling. Instead, for Firas, Jiu-Jitsu is the foundation that other fighting skills should complement. Another interesting fact about Zahabi is that he does not train Jiu-Jitsu with women, as he believes that it goes against his Islamic faith. I'll also add that he gives dating and relationship advice on his YouTube channel.
Coach, how to deal with hoflation? What is hoflation? I need explanation. What do you mean by hoflation? Is that like inflation, but as in women?
Personally, my favorite video that Firas has released about women was this one called, "This is the best way to lose your testosterone." Let's take a quick listen, shall we?
Like the first thing men have to do in the West is stop following women online that are half naked. It shows incredible weakness. Like, oh, the girl's in a bikini, I'm going to follow her. Oh, this girl's showing her booty, I'm going to follow her. Oh, this girl, she's got really pretty eyes and she's really sexy and she's showing her body, I'm going to follow her. So what do you think?
I guess that's why Ian Gary and Cody Goombrandt have never trained at Tristar Gym before. Stay based, Firas Zahabi. Stay based. Jackson Wink MMA Academy, which is formerly known as Jackson Submission Fighting, is a mixed martial arts gym based in Albuquerque, New Mexico that was founded in 1995 by Greg Jackson. Greg Jackson came from a family of wrestlers, and having grown up as a white kid in a mostly Hispanic neighborhood, he learned martial arts from an early age to keep himself from getting bullied. Jackson picked up Aikido at age 7, but he quit after finding that it was ineffective, an experience that would make him lose his belief in traditional martial arts, making him pursue boxing and kickboxing instead. After graduating high school in 1992, Greg Jackson used his knowledge of wrestling and striking to develop his own martial art, a system he called Gaido Jutsu, that combined elements of catch wrestling, judo, and Muay Thai into what was essentially a rudimentary form of mixed martial arts. Having been suspended from school multiple times for getting into fights, Greg Jackson's philosophy prioritized self-defense for the street over fighting for sport, which made sense, of course, especially when considering he developed Gaido Jutsu prior to the existence of MMA as a formal sport. This is reflected in the name of his art, as Greg Jackson thought that Gaido Jutsu meant way of the street in Japanese. However, as a Japanese speaker myself, I can confirm that this is not true, as the characters for Gaido are supposed to be pronounced as Gedo or Gedo. But interestingly, what I can say is that Gedo is a term in Buddhism used to describe one who has fallen away from the righteous path, which is quite ironic when you consider the life path of one of the men who became a black belt in Jackson's martial art. But tangents aside, Greg Jackson continued to develop and teach Gaido Jutsu, offering his services to the military and police. And in 1995, Greg Jackson opened his gym, where he lived for a while due to how tight money was. It was also around this time that Jackson began teaching himself Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was due to the success of Royce Gracie at UFC 1. And, most importantly, this was when Greg Jackson first met Mike Winkeljohn. Mike Winkeljohn was a kickboxer with a record of 25-7-3 with a 5th degree black belt in American Kempo Karate under Bill Packer and world titles in Muay Thai and Iska kickboxing. Winkeljohn's striking knowledge complemented Greg Jackson's wrestling and Gaido Jutsu in a great way. In 2000, due to the growing popularity of MMA, Greg Jackson rebranded his gym as an MMA gym. During this time, he worked with Diego Sanchez, one of the first of many major names to train with Jackson. And when Sanchez won the middleweight tournament for the first season of The Ultimate Fighter in 2005, the notoriety of Jackson's MMA exploded. Along with this growing fame, in 2007, he partnered full-time with Mike Winkeljohn to create the Jackson Wink MMA Academy as it stands today. Throughout the history of the academy, many great fighters have trained at the gym. Notably, there has been WEC and UFC contender Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone, UFC interim welterweight champion Carlos Condit, UFC women's bantamweight champion Holly Holm, UFC light heavyweight champion Rashad Evans, UFC featherweight Diego Brandao, UFC and Rise and Flyweight John Dodson, UFC heavyweight Shane Carwin, UFC middleweight Nate Marquardt, Bellator fighters Aaron Pico and Patchy Mix, and, after Dricus du Plessis, the second greatest African fighter of all time, Mike Platinum Perry.
Okay, I want to explain that I took a DNA test and the results came back French and German, British and Irish, and I was 2% African. So I am legally allowed to say the word Nick.
The greatest mixed martial artist of all time also trained at Jackson Winks. By which I mean George St. Pierre, of course, although GSP's main gym remained Tristar. However, even though most of the gym's fighters were nice people, Jackson Winks was also the longtime home to the biggest disgrace in the history of MMA, John Bones Jones. And I'm using the past tense here, because after Jones was arrested on September 24, 2021 for domestic violence charges against the mother of his children, Mike Winkeljohn banned John from Jackson Wink MMA Academy, which then led to Jones training at Jackson's MMA Acoma, a gym run by Greg Jackson's former student, Nick Urso. Now, this might be a little confusing, but even though it has the name Jackson in the title, Jackson's MMA Acoma isn't run by Greg Jackson or Mike Winkeljohn, and you can tell this is the case by just looking at how different the logos are. The MMA Acoma is also housed in the old building where the Jackson Wink MMA Academy used to be, which makes it even more confusing. But anyways, the point is that John Jones got kicked out by Greg Jackson and Mike Winkeljohn because, even though they supported him after all of the terrible things he did, the domestic violence arrest made them finally realize there was not going to be any change in his behavior. However, if you look past the failed PED tests and litany of crimes, John Jones is the best product of the Jackson Wink system. In addition to being a black belt in Gaido Jutsu under Greg Jackson, a fact that he demonstrated through his grappling prowess, John Jones's creativity in striking was due in part to Mike Winkeljohn's background in Kempo Karate. In a 2015 interview he did with the UFC, Mike stated that the techniques from traditional martial arts are the hardest for fighters to predict as they tend to be thrown the least. And no better was this demonstrated than by Jones and other Jackson Winks fighters' use of the oblique kick. The kick, which is taken from traditional striking arts, is targeted at an opponent's knee, with the aim being to snap their joint back, causing serious ligament damage. Although the oblique kick is used by almost every MMA gym now, the attack was definitely popularized by the success that John Jones had with it. And speaking of kicks, another trait that was common among many Jackson Wink fighters was their ability to effectively set up head kick KOs. Notably, there's many of Cowboy Cerrone's performances, and there's Holly Holm's KO win over Ronda Rousey, and John Jones KOing Daniel Cormier in their rematch. Although that technically doesn't count since Jones tested positive for Turinabol, but still, the technique is there, right? However, even though the gym had quite a lot of success, there were still many issues. Notably, there were multiple instances where those who trained at Jackson Wink had to fight each other. Examples include George St. Pierre fighting Carlos Condit, Mike Perry fighting Donald Cerrone, and John Jones fighting Rashad Evans. In the case of Evans and Cerrone, the preference that Mike Winkeljohn and Greg Jackson showed for Jones and Perry led to them leaving Jackson Wink, with Cerrone going on to train at his own facility that he built on his ranch, and Evans joining the Black Zillions, which, as I discussed previously, is the predecessor gym to Kill Cliff FC. And notice how in both of these cases, the coaches gave priority to the younger fighter. This culture of giving priority training to younger fighters over others is also what led to Diego Sanchez leaving the gym in 2019, which in turn led to him getting preyed upon by Joshua Fabia. Jackson Wink has also been in somewhat of a decline during the late 2010s to early 2020s, with fighters like Cowboy Cerrone and Patchy Mix saying that the gym's culture was falling apart due to Jackson and Winklejohn being less engaged with coaching and prioritizing getting memberships from the wider public over training elite fighters. Former Jackson Wink fighters also spoke up about how they were pressured to stop training at different gyms. The style of grappling and striking taught at the gym has also been criticized as being behind the times, as modern MMA has become less focused on open mat grappling and more so on cage wrestling, and modern MMA striking has now fully incorporated the oblique kick. And then, there's also the fact that many of the gym's best fighters have simply aged out or left. However, the gym cannot be counted out just yet, as there are new talents who are on the rise at Jackson Wink. Notably, there is Steve Garcia, a ranked UFC featherweight known for his knockout power, and UFC heavyweight Josh Hawkett, who is most well known for his politically charged rant after winning his contract on Dana White's Contender Series. The gym has a couple other good prospects on the regional scene, so while Jackson Wink may not be the pinnacle of MMA gyms any longer, the facility is still an above average place to be. In addition to being a gym, Jackson Wink offers dormitories to fighters who wish to train there full-time, and also has an MMA management service called Jackson Wink Worldwide Sports that helps to promote and handle negotiations for fighters. And although many Jackson Wink fighters are signed to Jackson Wink Worldwide Sports, a fighter who is a member of the gym does not have to be signed with the management team, as is shown by how Aaron Pico trains at Jackson Wink, but is managed by Dominance MMA under Ali Abdelaziz. But yes, Jackson Wink's heyday as the pinnacle of MMA training may have passed, but it is nonetheless a solid gym producing good fighters to this day. Syndicate MMA is a mixed martial arts gym in Las Vegas, Nevada that was founded in 2004 by head coach John Wood. Much like Extreme Couture, Syndicate MMA is literally a 5-minute drive away from the UFC Performance Institute and a 4-minute drive away from the UFC Apex, making the gym one of the most convenient places to train if you are in the UFC. Most notably, this gym is the main gym for the greatest bantamweight of all time, Merab Dvalishvili. Besides Merab, other notable fighters who train at Syndicate MMA include Merab's best friend, former UFC bantamweight champion and UFC featherweight contender Aljamain Sterling, UFC light heavyweight Khalil Rountree Jr., UFC featherweight Chepe Mariscal, UFC lightweight Nazim Sadikov, and UFC bantamweight Davey Grant. The now retired UFC women's flyweight Joanne Calderwood also fought out of the gym, and ended up getting the Calder on her name shaved off when she married head coach John Wood in 2021. And just for the record, no, this was not a Pat Barry Rose Namajunas situation. Joanne was in her 30s when she met John Wood. Fighters from Syndicate MMA cross-train very often at Extreme Couture and the UFC Performance Institute, and vice versa. So other fighters who have trained at Syndicate include Zhang Wei Li, Sean Strickland, Cody Garbrandt, Patchy Mix, and many, many others. I also have to mention that Merab and Aljo are still coached by Ray Longo and Matt Serra, who run the Serra Longo fight team in Long Island, New York, which I will cover later on in this same video. Syndicate's founder and head coach, Big John Wood, was a professional fighter in the early 2000s, compiling a record of 7-6 and competing on Season 7 of The Ultimate Fighter before becoming a full-time coach. After spending some time living in Arizona, John Wood moved back to his home state of Nevada in 2001, where he started the Las Vegas Combat Club alongside Frank Mir, who would go on to become the UFC heavyweight champion. After John Wood received a $20,000 settlement for a car accident he was involved in, he went to his coach at the time and asked if they could open an MMA gym in an area of the city where families and children wouldn't have a hard time going. This led to him getting access to a 20,000 square foot building where he would begin to work on that goal. John Wood has said that he runs his gym like a business, saying that if you don't run a business like a business, it can fail quickly. In the first year of owning his gym, Wood experienced quite a lot of trouble, including his coach leaving the gym after just 3 months. However, after finding another person to pick up the extra work, Wood managed to keep the lights on for many years, at which point they got a sponsorship from the energy drink company Zions, which was a huge sponsor for the UFC from 2007 to 2014. At first, the name of the gym was Combat Club. Then, After getting the sponsorship, the name was changed to Zion's Training Center. And then the name became Warrior Training Center because Wood's friend owned a clothing brand by that name. And then it became the Throwdown Training Center. And then, finally, when John Wood had enough money, the gym's name was finalized as Syndicate MMA. Unlike the other Las Vegas gym down the street, Extreme Couture, which has a very distinct Extreme Couture style that I've spoken about previously, Syndicate MMA doesn't have a very clear and distinct style. There are wrestlers like Merab and Aljo, and strikers like Khalil Roundtree. However, John Wood has spoken at length about his coaching methods, especially when it comes to game planning for a fight and cornering a fighter. With game plans, John takes the old Mike Tyson quote, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face," very much to heart, and actually deliberately does not tell his fighters the entire strategy for their fights. This is to keep them from becoming worried if something does not go to plan, or if they get concussed mid-fight, leading to them becoming unable to fully recall the plan. Instead, he builds strategies based on his fighters' tendencies, gives them a few instructions, and once they understand one or two key points, lets them fight as they wish to. When cornering a fighter, Wood has the same mentality. He says that the job of the corner is to fill in the blanks, especially when a fight is in the feeling out process. So if a fighter is being indecisive, Wood would demand simple actions like jab, feint, or level change to fill that empty time. The upside to training at Syndicate MMA is similar to the upside of training at Extreme Couture, or straight up training at the UFC PI itself, which is the plethora of high-level training partners you can have. The downside, of course, is potentially having to fight training partners or having information from your camp leaked. But anyways, Syndicate is one of the most successful teams in modern mixed martial arts, and it will likely continue to be that way as more and more fighters come to train in Las Vegas. Aspinall BJJ is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu team that has its main location in St. Helens, Merseyside, England, that was founded in 2007 by Andy Aspinall, the father of the UFC heavyweight champion Tom Aspinall. The gym is primarily focused on teaching gi jiu-jitsu, but MMA is also a part of the program. And most importantly for the purposes of this video, the fight team at the gym has been purposefully built around Tom Aspinall, as the members of the gym are overwhelmingly fighters from the higher weight classes. Before Andy Aspinall started his gym, he was an IT manager at a regular company who would train jiu-jitsu with Tom and his younger brother, Joe, at the family home. But when Tom turned 12, Andy quit his full-time job to teach jiu-jitsu, with his hope being that Tom and Joe would go on to teach the martial art as well. Then, when Tom was 16 years old, he went on an extreme growth spurt that caused him to balloon in size from 5 foot 8 inches, or 173 centimeters, to 6 foot 5 inches, which is 196 centimeters, giving him the crazy heavyweight frame he has today. Andy Aspinall was one of the very first jiu-jitsu black belts in Great Britain, making his skills highly sought after in the country. This led to him coaching jiu-jitsu at Team Calbon, the UK gym most known for producing the former UFC fighter and bane of Jake Paul, Darren Till. This led to Tom Aspinall and Darren Till frequently sparring together. However, even though the gorilla is a chunky guy, he's no heavyweight. This led to Tom Aspinall training in a somewhat lax environment even while he was in the UFC. But this all changed after Tom's knee injury during his first fight with Curtis Blades, which made Tom and Andy reevaluate their approach to his training. That led to the formation of the now famous heavyweight fight team that trains with the Aspinalls in the United Kingdom. Notable fighters who train with Tom Aspinall include UFC heavyweight and former PFL heavyweight champion Ante DeLiha, KSW heavyweight champion Phil DeFries, UFC heavyweight Mick Parkin, the UFC light heavyweight Modestas Bukauskas, and former UFC heavyweight and Octagon title challenger Martin Buday. The former world's strongest man turned MMA fighter Eddie Hall also trains at the gym. The UFC heavyweight prospect Mario Pinto has also trained in the past with Tom and his team. Although, funnily enough, Mario is coached by Stuart Austin, who is the man who submitted Tom Aspinall early on in his pro career. The gym also brings in high-quality specialists as training partners from time to time, including the former heavyweight lineal boxing champion Tyson Fury. The upside of training at Team Aspinall is quite clear, as it is one of the few gyms in the world that can get you access to solid heavyweight training partners. At most other gyms, it can be very difficult to find other heavyweights to train with, leading to a situation where a heavyweight fighter might just muscle their way through everything without developing their skill. The downside of training at this gym, of course, is that it makes it difficult to actually get a shot at winning the UFC Heavyweight Championship. Tom Aspinall and Ante DeLiha have said that they will never fight each other, with Tom saying that he would rather vacate the belt than fight his friends. Also, currently the gym has a bit of a curse going on with eye pokes, with Tom Aspinall being attacked for being a quitter after getting skewered by Cyril Gane at UFC 321. And then, literally the week after, Ante DeLiha eye-poked Waldo Cortez Acosta, who got to sit down on a stool to recover from the poke, and then KO'd Ante DeLiha brutally right afterwards. A result that really didn't reflect well on Tom Aspinall. But nevertheless, the gym is the place to be if you want to develop as a fighter at the upper weight classes, as none of the fighters at the gym have glaring weaknesses in striking or grappling, which is better than can be said of most other MMA heavyweights. Nova União is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA gym founded in 1995 by Wendell Alexander and Andre Dede Pederneiras that has its main location in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. In the early 1990s, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions were beginning to become commonplace in Rio de Janeiro. Wendell and Dede competed frequently in these events, which led to them becoming friends. This led to them forming a team under Dede's banner, where they placed third overall at a tournament, and then under Wendell's banner, where they placed second. Their team was one that crossed multiple class and cultural boundaries in Brazil. Dede was a student of Carlson Gracie, who of course is a part of the famed Gracie clan that is deeply intertwined with the history of mixed martial arts. However, Wendell Alexander had learned his jiu-jitsu from Sebastião Ricardo, a student of Oswaldo Fada. Oswaldo Fada was a jiu-jitsu practitioner who was not associated with the Gracies. On the contrary, he challenged the Gracie clan on 2 separate occasions to determine whose grappling was superior. Fada was known for teaching grappling to students from poorer areas of Rio de Janeiro who couldn't afford the Gracies' costly classes, and also for teaching leg attacks, techniques that were ignored and often looked down upon by the Gracies. Wendell and Dede's partnership was a combination of the upper class and traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu with the lower class and unorthodox grappling that had come from Fada's school. And as a result, the name they came up with for their new team was Nova União, which means New Union in Portuguese. Nova União was one of the greatest innovators in the early days of Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, with one of the major contributions being how Dede was the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach in Brazil who opened up his gym to foreigners when he let the future UFC legend, the prodigy, BJ Penn, train at his gym. This led to BJ Penn achieving his black belt under Dede in a time span only surpassed by Derek Moneyberg. And then, Penn won the World Jiu-Jitsu Championship in 2000. While Wendell was never that interested in competition, Dede was a pioneer of early mixed martial arts. In 1998, Dede fought in Vale Tudo, Japan, where he defeated the veteran Rumina Sato via soccer kick to ground and pound KO. After that victory, Dede would challenge for the UFC Welterweight Championship against Pat Miletich. Dede would lose due to a cut in the second round, and then, after 2 more fights against Kao Uno and Genki Sudo in Japan, he would retire from MMA to focus on coaching, and down the line, running the MMA promotion Shudo Brazil. Following the spirit of Oswaldo Fada, Dede placed a special emphasis on charitable work and training those coming from dire poverty, a choice that would lead to him building up one of his greatest students. At 17 years old, Jose Aldo would leave his home of Manaus to pursue martial arts in Rio de Janeiro, where he would begin to train under Dede and Nova União. Upon learning that Aldo was penniless, Dede would allow Jose Aldo to sleep at the gym and stop charging him for tuition. Aldo was a quick learner and very apt at the art of jiu-jitsu, but wanted to pursue mixed martial arts because he enjoyed striking and knocking opponents out in front of a cheering crowd. And while training at Nova União, Jose Aldo went on his legendary run through the WEC and UFC, racking up 10 title wins and an 18-fight win streak before losing his belt to Conor McGregor. Besides the King of Rio, some other notable fighters to come from the gym include the UFC bantamweight champion Renan Barão, the UFC heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos, UFC middleweight Thales Leites, and UFC flyweight Jussier Formiga. Although all of those fighters are now retired from MMA, some current UFC fighters training out of the gym include UFC flyweights Rafael Estevam and Jafel Filho, UFC lightweight Caio Fernandes, and a middleweight prospect who really made a name for himself with his KO win on Dana White's Contender Series, Damian Pinas. While Nova União is first and foremost a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym, the gym has had some of the most standout Muay Thai strikers in MMA history, with Jose Aldo and Renan Barão characteristically having a very upright stance and high guard. Many fighters at the gym are also very proficient with their use of leg kicks, with Jose Aldo infamously tearing up Uriah Faber's leg with kicks during their fight in the WEC, and over a decade and a half later, Caio Fernandes TKOing Harry Hardwick with leg kicks. However, fighters from the gym have struggled against opponents with extreme cardio, with Jose Aldo falling to Max Holloway, Renan Barão losing to TJ Dillashaw, and Junior Dos Santos getting melted by Cain Velasquez. But as shown by the new generation of UFC fighters it has produced and the success that those fighters are having, Nova União remains one of the best gyms for upcoming talent in Brazil. The gym also has branches around the globe, making their training more accessible than ever before. AMC Pankration is a gym that was located in Woodinville, Washington, that was founded in 1991 by Matt Hume. Matt Hume, who had trained in judo, boxing, and folk-style wrestling as a child, took up an interest in the ancient Greek martial art of pankration while he was studying at Central Washington University. Pankration is an ancient Greek martial art that took place at the ancient Olympics. It was basically a very early form of MMA, with fights including punches, kicks, wrestling, submissions, and headbutts. Basically, anything that wasn't biting or eye gouging was allowed. Matt Hume's interest in the ancient martial art led to him starting a pankration club at his university where he invited various different martial artists to train together. After graduating, Matt Hume partnered up with Hiroshi Manashi to form AMC Pankration, which is short for American Martial Arts Center Pankration. In 1994, Matt Hume began his professional career as a fighter, where he would compete in the Japanese promotion Pancrase, where he faced notable names like Ken Shamrock and Minoru Suzuki. After finishing his pro career at 5-5, Matt Hume would dedicate himself to coaching, where he would go on to develop the legendary flyweight fighter Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Under Matt Hume's guidance, Demetrius Johnson would go on to set the record for the most title defenses in UFC history. Another notable fighter out of AMC Pankration is Bibiano Fernandes, a Dream Bantamweight Grand Prix champion. Both DJ and Bibiano Fernandes also became champions in Championship, where Matt Hume also serves as the senior vice president of the company and has done so since 2011, which really helps to explain why the trade between Demetrius Johnson and Ben Askren went off without much of a hitch. There's also not much more I can say about AMC Pankration here, since the gym was never a mega gym like ATT or Extreme Couture, and was basically Matt Hume's own personal operation. An incredibly impressive accomplishment, since the gym was home to one of the GOATs of the sport. However, the gym has been closed since 2023, and AMC Pankration's website has not been updated since Demetrius Johnson was in the UFC, so it is quite likely that this gym may be, for all intents and purposes, defunct. Scrappy MMA and Fitness is a mixed martial arts gym located in Perth, Western Australia that was founded by head coach Ben Vickers. Most notably, Scrappy MMA and Fitness is the home of UFC welterweight champion Jack Della Maddalena, and has been his main training facility for the entirety of his career. Ben Vickers grew up in the United Kingdom, where he joined the army at an early stage. While he was in the military, Ben Vickers developed an addiction to alcohol as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, two problems he's written about at length on his blog on the Eternal MMA website. After leaving the army, Vickers took up fighting and had a couple of pro fights, but retired quite early on in his career, hanging up his gloves in 2008 at 28 years old when he realized that he couldn't become a world champion. However, this didn't make Vickers abandon the sport. On the contrary, he doubled down on his commitment to MMA as a coach. This led to Vickers training small groups of people at a time before he started Scrappy MMA. Jack Della Maddalena and his brother, Josh Della, joined Scrappy MMA very early on into the development of the Scrappy MMA team, with Jack stating that he joined Scrappy when he was around 13 to 14 years old, which puts his date joining the gym around 2009 to 2011. In 2015, one of the most major changes in Scrappy MMA's short history happened, as Cam O'Neill, the father of UFC women's flyweight Casey O'Neill and the founder of Eternal MMA, Australia's largest regional promotion, brought the show to Perth. As Eternal MMA put on their event, Cam O'Neill and Ben Vickers began to work together, which eventually led to Vickers buying a share in Eternal MMA, making him a co-owner. This makes Ben Vickers a promoter and gym owner, which presents a conflict of interest. However, Ben Vickers has said that his main goal with Eternal MMA is to make sure his fighters can get fights, and that the aim of the promotion is to develop talent that can perform at the highest level in the UFC. As a coach, Ben Vickers believes that a fighter's health should be prioritized beyond all else, stating that he will tell fighters to stay away from training if they believe they have suffered a concussion or any other form of brain trauma, even if they haven't been diagnosed. Scrappy MMA has a very strict code for health, safety, and cleanliness, including mandatory showers before and after training. Prioritizing the health and safety of fighters over intensity in sparring represents a divergence from the much harder gym cultures of old school gyms like Shootabox, where hard sparring every day was the norm. Vickers, drawing on his own struggles with mental health, also has a solid grasp of what motivates a fighter, and his guidance helped Jack Della Maddalena overcome losing his first 2 pro fights. Although Ben Vickers is the head coach for Jack Della Maddalena and Scrappy MMA, he frequently brings in sparring partners and trainers from outside the gym to help prepare his fighters. Most notably, the second best grappler of all time, Craig Jones, has been training with the Scrappy MMA team since at least JDM's fight with Kevin Holland. Vickers has said that Jones' style works very well with Maddalena's ability to scramble out of dangerous and disadvantageous positions, which JDM demonstrated in his comeback victories against the likes of Ramazan Emeev, where he escaped a choke and proceeded to knock the Dagestani out, and his fight with Gilbert Burns, where he finished Burns after scrambling out from having his back taken. Other notable fighters who have trained at Scrappy MMA include UFC featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski and UFC flyweight Steve Versek, albeit both of them are members of Freestyle MMA and Wilkes MMA respectively. But yes, Scrappy MMA is a small but elite gym for a reason, and the fact that Ben Vickers took JDM from being 0-2 on the regional scene to being the world champion is a testament to his prowess as a coach. And put the "keep pinging the cunt" clip right here. Roufusport MMA is a gym based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that was founded in 2006 by the late Jeffrey Duke Rufus. And before I begin this section, I want to promote this GoFundMe that was started for Duke's daughter, Lula Rufus. You can find a link to the GoFundMe both in the description below and on the Roufusport Gym website. Ben Askren has donated to it, and as of the time of me writing the script for this video, it's still a ways away from reaching the goal. So yes, if you can spare some money, please send some money their way. Duke Rufus began training in martial arts at a young age, including kickboxing, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, Karate, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In his early 20s, Rufus began competing in kickboxing and Muay Thai, winning numerous heavyweight and super heavyweight titles in WKA, IKF, and Waco. This led to Duke Rufus amassing a record of 36, 8, and 1 in kickboxing, with 26 KOs. After retiring from fighting, Rufus became a full-time coach, where he would train multiple top-level fighters. Most notable among Duke's students include the brothers Anthony and Sergio Pettis, with Anthony becoming a UFC lightweight champion and Sergio becoming a Bellator bantamweight champion. There is also Tyron Woodley, who was the UFC welterweight champion, the Bellator welterweight champion Ben Askren, the UFC featherweight Christian Rodriguez, the UFC lightweight turned commentator Paul Felder, and of course, the GOAT of this entire sport, CM Punk. According to Anthony Pettis, Duke Rufus served as a second father to the brothers, who had lost their biological father while they were still both children. In addition to being their coach, Duke Rufus would mentor them on life, with the discussions often going on into the late hours of the night. The Pettis brothers also worked very well with Roufus's background in traditional striking arts like karate and taekwondo, with some of their wildest attacks being techniques they developed alongside Duke Roufus. Notably, there's the Showtime kick that Pettis landed on Benson Henderson during their fight in the WEC, the jumping Superman punch where Anthony bounded off the cage to KO Stephen Thompson, and Sergio Pettis' spinning back fist KO win over Koji Horiguchi. And yes, Roufus was actually teaching these techniques, as you can see in this video of Duke Roufus demonstrating a leaping left hook where he bounds off the cage, which is very similar to the punch that Anthony Pettis landed on Wonderboy. In addition to developing these highly unorthodox striking techniques, Roufus managed to make Tyron Woodley, a pure wrestler, a competent MMA striker with a strong right overhand. But as for Ben Askren, well, at least he was doing the spinning back fist of doom, you know? One incident that I have to make note of here is the death of Dennis Moulton Jr., an amateur kickboxer who was training at Roufusport. In 2014, during an unregulated kickboxing bout at the Eagles Club in Milwaukee that Roufus had organized and promoted, Dennis Moulton Jr. tragically died due to severe head trauma that he had sustained during the fight, which may have been exacerbated by the dehydration from the weight cut. In 2017, Moulton's family sued Duke Roufus himself, the men who had served as Moulton's cornermen, and the referee and ringside doctor of the bout for damages. The plaintiff showed how the cornerman kept propping up Dennis Moulton, despite Dennis showing at multiple points in the fight that he was unable to intelligently defend himself. The ringside doctor also was checking his phone instead of keeping an eye on the bout, and of course, the referee failed to stop the bout despite the signs of trouble. Duke Roufus was involved in the suit because, as the promoter of the bout, he had hired all of the officials involved. All of the cases were settled out of court by 2020, and Dennis Moulton Jr.'s death led to a bill being passed in the Wisconsin State Senate that expanded safety protections for boxing and MMA to kickboxing, making it so that kickboxing bouts would require adequate safety gear, staffing, and fighters' insurance. Of course, this is not the kind of incident that I want to take lightly, but it has to be mentioned since it does loom large in the history of the gym. And ever since that accident, the Roufusport gym has not had any catastrophic incidents like what happened with Dennis Moulton Jr. On October 3rd, 2025, Duke Roufus would corner for Sergio Pettis in Dubai against Magomed Magomedov in a PFL bantamweight bout. Pettis would get ragdolled by Magomedov at first, but then, in the second round, he would get a spinning elbow KO win, a spectacular counter straight out of Duke's playbook. And 2 weeks later, Duke Roufus would pass away in his sleep at the age of 55. His gym mourned him, and his students have made it clear that they will continue to run Roufusport in honor of his legacy. I hope Duke Roufus rests easy knowing how much he has contributed to this sport. Fortis MMA is an MMA gym in Dallas, Texas that was founded in 2017 by head coach Saif Sayoud. This makes Fortis one of the newest MMA gyms I've covered so far. Raised in Indiana, Saif Sayoud began his martial arts journey at age 3, where he began training karate at his father's dojo. Saif Sayoud trained in judo as well, leading to him winning multiple state championships in the two martial arts. Saif Sayoud wanted to pursue a career in martial arts, but chose to pursue a college education in political science and law due to the lack of opportunities in combat sports. However, in 2005, after being offered multiple sponsorships to pursue a fighting career, Saif Sayoud moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico to train under Greg Jackson at the Jackson Wink MMA Academy. During his professional career, Saif Sayoud went 3-0 on the regional scene. However, he also found himself troubled by many injuries, including ACL and bicep tears. This led to him retiring from MMA and turning to coaching, where he began teaching at Octagon MMA, where he would first gain some experience. Wanting a bigger and better facility for the fighters under his tutelage, in 2015 he partnered with 3-time NBA All-Star Darren Williams, who had trained with Sayoud for fun, to help build a new gym. Fortis MMA opened its doors 2 years later, with Sayoud having 90% ownership and Darren having 10% at the time of me making this video. Saif Sayoud started small, training a few fighters at a time, and at the start he had no fighters in the UFC. But eventually, he built his gym up to being one of the largest in the southwestern United States with multiple UFC fighters. Notable fighters who have trained at Fortis include the UFC flyweight champion Brandon Moreno, UFC welterweight Geoff Neal, UFC bantamweight Miles Johns, UFC lightweight Diego Ferreira, UFC middleweight Uriah Hall, UFC women's bantamweight Macy Chiasson, and UFC light heavyweights turned heavyweights Ryan Spann and Kennedy Nzechukwu. Also, Damon Jackson, a retired UFC fighter who trained under Sayif Saud at Fortis MMA, has started his own branch of the gym in Rockwell, Texas. Fighters from Fortis MMA are known for their boxing technique, with Brandon Moreno and Geoff Neal both being known as some of the best boxers in their respective weight classes. The gym's fighters also have decent takedown and grappling defense, which both Moreno and Neal have demonstrated in their bouts against Amir Albazi and Bilal Muhammad respectively. It is also worth noting that Ryan Spann and Kennedy Nzechukwu were both encouraged by Sayif Saud to move up from light heavyweight to heavyweight, allowing them to focus more on their skills and less on the weight cut. This has resulted in better results for both, as the level of competition is also not as high at the heavier weight class. Sayif Saud, who once was studying to be an attorney, is well known in the MMA community for being a very direct cornerman, often shouting instructions right in the face of his fighter. This works for some fighters and not for others. However, it definitely can be effective at shocking a fighter out of a state of indecisiveness. As Saud himself says, he simply does not sugarcoat what is happening in a fight. So if you fight out of Fortis MMA and you're down 2 rounds, you can be quite certain that he won't tell you to play it safe behind your jab like coaches from other gyms. Serra Longo Fight Team is a mixed martial arts fight team based in Long Island, New York that was founded by Matt Serra and Ray Longo. The fight team is made up of 2 gyms, Serra BJJ in Huntington and Longo's MMA in Garden City. The fight team got started when a 17-year-old Matt Serra met Ray Longo at the Oishi Judo Gym in New York City. The teenage Matt Serra had been planning to join the Marines, but after a street fight had resulted in him getting a misdemeanor on his record, he had to find a new path, which then led to him pursuing jiu-jitsu. Ray Longo was an accountant who had been inspired to pick up martial arts by Bruce Lee and had trained in arts like Jeet Kune Do and Muay Thai prior to starting jiu-jitsu. At the gym, Serra and Longo came to an agreement where Matt Serra would compete as an MMA fighter and Ray Longo would serve as a striking coach and cornerman, encouraging Serra to pick up Muay Thai. Matt Serra grew very quickly as a BJJ practitioner, and in 2000 became the first American to receive a black belt from Renzo Gracie. Serra also grew as a fighter, eventually going on to win the comeback season of The Ultimate Fighter, challenge Georges St. Pierre for the title, and win the UFC welterweight title in what is considered by many to be the greatest upset in UFC history. Matt Serra's victory over GSP is in large part due to Ray Longo prioritizing Serra's boxing during the training camp leading up to the title fight, as Longo had assumed, and assumed correctly, that GSP was only afraid of Matt Serra's jiu-jitsu. However, that was not Serra Longo's only success with pulling off major upsets against all-time divisional greats, as after Matt Serra retired from MMA in 2010, he and Ray Longo began to coach the undefeated college wrestling phenom Chris Weidman. Weidman tore his way through the UFC middleweight rankings, where he faced the legendary Anderson Silva, and in their bout, after getting this piece of advice from Ray Longo,
"I want you to punch a hole in the chest. That's what I want."
Weidman went on to do just that, pulling off another massive upset for the Serra Longo fight team. Other top-tier fighters who have trained at the Serra Longo fight team include the UFC bantamweight champions Merab Dvalishvili and Aljamain Sterling, UFC lightweights Nazim Sadikov and Matt Frivola, and of course, the strongest real estate salesman of all time, Al Iaquinta. The UFC women's strawweight Mizuki Inoue and her younger brother, the rising bantamweight champion Naoki Inoue, have also trained at the fight team in the past, with Mizuki still being a member. And while Stephen Wonderboy Thompson has never become an official member of the fight team, Wonderboy has worked a lot with the team in the past, which is in part due to Thompson's brother being married to Chris Weidman's sister. The style of the fight team is characterized with a strong reliance on wrestling and jiu-jitsu to control opponents, with Merab, Aljo, Weidman, Frivola, Iaquinta, and Matt Serra himself relying on their wrestling and grappling prowess to defeat their opponents. Nowadays, due to Merab and Aljo moving to train at Syndicate, Ray Longo finds himself traveling out to Vegas to work with the team there quite often, leading to a bit of a blurred line between the teams. But considering the friendly atmosphere they have there, I doubt it leads to much friction. Fight Ready MMA is a gym located in Scottsdale, Arizona that was founded in 2011 by Scott Peters and David Zoween. The story of the gym goes back to 2008, when Scott Peters, a former NFL offensive lineman who had taken an interest in training jiu-jitsu, opened a branch of the famed Lions Den Academy in Scottsdale. The Lions Den was a notorious early MMA gym that was home to many early fighters, including Guy Metzger, Maurice Smith, and of course the UFC Hall of Famer Ken Shamrock. The Lions Den was known for its extremely rigorous tryouts and borderline abusive sparring culture, where higher-ranking members would beat the lower-ranking members to a pulp. However, as the glory days of the Lions Den Academy and its almost comically harsh training methods faded, Peters and Zoween decided to buy out the gym and rebrand it to Fight Ready. The most notable product of the Fight Ready gym is Henry Cejudo, who is a two-weight UFC champion, an Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling. Henry's brother, Angel Cejudo, is a wrestling coach at Fight Ready MMA. The head coach of the gym, Santino DeFranco, was a pro fighter who competed on the 9th season of The Ultimate Fighter. Other notable names who have trained at Fight Ready include Chan Sung Jung, who is more commonly known as the Korean Zombie, Davison Figueiredo, Amir Albazi, and Tracy Cortez. Also, after getting kicked out of Jackson Wing for beating his fiancée in 2021, John Jones went to train at Fight Ready. This move resulted in some controversy for the gym, but so far there do not seem to be any major problems with Jones being there. One important thing that Fight Ready does are their super camps, which are special fight camps for fighters competing in UFC title fights. These super camps are specifically intended for preparing fighters to be able to deal with every conceivable situation they may come across in a fight, and are quite well known for how holistic they are. But yes, I don't have much else to say about Fight Ready. It's a great gym, and you can always be certain that Henry Cejudo will be doing fight and technique breakdowns there for years to come. factoryX Muay Thai is a gym based in Englewood, Colorado that was founded in 2009 by head coach and owner Mark Montoya. Mark Montoya grew up with a background in baseball. He was fascinated with boxing, but his mother didn't allow him to train it because she didn't want to see him get injured. Montoya's talent in baseball led to him getting a scholarship to Metropolitan State University, and after graduating from college, he worked for a brief time as a journalist. However, he found himself unhappy with his career path, and Montoya looked for a way to change up his life. As luck would have it, he ended up watching some Muay Thai fights on ESPN and falling in love with the striking art. This led to Montoya beginning training in the art of 8 limbs at 23 years old. He started his training at a Colorado gym called Champions, during which time he worked with Dwayne Ludwig, a man who would go on to fight in the UFC and become a famous coach in his own right. After training for a while, Montoya traveled to Thailand, where he would further improve his skills, and would also take a few Muay Thai fights in Florida. And around this time, Montoya decided he wanted to become a striking coach for mixed martial arts. This decision led to Montoya training in BJJ, so as to make sure he had a well-rounded understanding of the fight game. After developing his skills and coaching ability, Mark Montoya opened factoryX. The name was derived from how, back when the gym was in a small facility, Mark Montoya's strength and conditioning coach described the gym as a, quote, sweat factory. factoryX is home to notable fighters like the UFC featherweights Yusuf Zalal and David Anama, the UFC bantamweights Jonathan Martinez and Chris Gutierrez, UFC middleweight Cody Brundage, the UFC light heavyweight Dustin Jacoby, and the former PFL tournament winner Rob Wilkinson. Fighters who have trained at the gym in the past include UFC flyweight Brandon Royval, UFC lightweight Alexander Hernandez, UFC light heavyweight Anthony On Paper Smith, and, somewhat infamously, James Krause and Isaac Dolgarian, who I will get to in a bit. As is implied in the name of the gym, Muay Thai is the main strong point for factoryX fighters, with this being demonstrated by the likes of Yusuf Zalal, Chris Gutierrez, and Jonathan Martinez. In his fight against Jack Shore, Zalal demonstrated his Muay Thai by landing a clean step-in knee to hurt Shore before submitting him with an arm triangle. Chris Gutierrez landed a similar knee to KO Frankie Edgar and is known for having a unique fight style built around teeps, front kicks, and low kicks to outpoint opponents at range. And of course, besides Edson Barboza, Jonathan Martinez is the only guy in the UFC to have 2 stoppages via leg kicks, destroying Cub Swanson and Adrian Yanez's legs with his powerful inside low kick, and even nearly finishing Marcus McGee with low kicks in the 3rd round. It is also worth noting that Anthony Smith had a very Muay Thai oriented stance while he was still competing, with a high guard and very upright posture. However, there are weaknesses to this Muay Thai heavy fight style, which is a lack of boxing offense and takedown defense. When Jonathan Martinez fought Jose Aldo, who is fantastic at checking leg kicks, he found himself getting outboxed. And when Chris Gutierrez and Yusuf Zalal fought Song Yadong and Ilya Topuria respectively, they got pressured by boxing combinations and taken down multiple times. And controversially, individuals who have trained at factoryX have come under scrutiny for possibly being involved in fight fixing. In 2022, the former factoryX fighter James Krause, who by this time had become a coach at his own gym, Glory MMA and Fitness, was involved in a sports betting fraud investigation regarding a fight involving Derek Minner, who was one of the fighters he coached. In a UFC Apex prelim, where Minner faced Shaylin Nuerdembeki, there was a suspicious shift in the betting odds close to the fight, with a lot of bets coming in on Shaylin to win by TKO in the 1st round. And when the fight took place, Minner threw a kick that caused him to buckle in pain, leading to Shaylin getting a win by TKO in the 1st round. And after the fight, it was revealed that Minner had fought with a torn ACL, and that the finishing sequence happened precisely because Minner had kicked with the injured leg. James Krause, who had admitted to betting on his fighters' own fights, as well as running a betting Discord where he would sell picks and even post losses for his clients, was suspended from coaching in the UFC. All of the fighters who were training with Krause were then required to find other gyms to train at. And this incident involving James Krause led to the UFC banning fighters, their friends, and close associates from betting on fights. Then, 3 years after the incident with Krause, another individual associated with factoryX ended up getting embroiled in a betting scandal. The featherweight prospect Isaac Dolgarian, who had been training out of factoryX, was scheduled to fight Yadir Deval. Leading up to the fight, Isaac was a moderate favorite to win. However, a few days before the fight took place, there was a drastic shift in the betting line, with a great deal of money coming in on Yadir to win by finish. And as was the case with the Derek Minner fight, the fight between Dolgarian and Delval ended in a 1st round submission win for Delval. This performance from Dolgarian was particularly suspect, since Dolgarian was a prospect best known for his grappling prowess, and he made multiple mistakes in the grappling that were uncharacteristic for a fighter with his talents. This bizarre performance and the shift in the betting line led to the fight becoming the subject of an FBI investigation. Isaac Dolgarian was subsequently cut from the UFC, and he was also ejected from the factoryX team. During this time, there was an allegation that the FBI had raided the factoryX gym and confiscated a number of fighters' phones for an investigation. However, factoryX publicly denied this, and also posted a photo of the fight team holding up their phones to prove that they still had them. As of the time of me making this video, this new situation involving Isaac Dolgarian is still developing. Mark Montoya has gone on the record denying any involvement with fight fixing, and so have other fighters from the gym. And since there has been nothing conclusive so far, I have to end this section on this. If there is any fight fixing ring at factoryX, I hope it is busted as soon as possible. However, if they are clear, which I'm currently leaning towards being the case, I hope that the gym gets to keep its reputation intact, as it is incredibly difficult to clear one's name after these kinds of allegations are made. Anyways, that is the end of part 3 of every MMA gym and its style explained. And frankly, I do know that there are many more gyms out there, but man, I have been getting burned out on this series. So yes, please do not expect a part 4 from this point onwards, because I am just absolutely exhausted with this. Thank you and goodbye.